Good evening. Tonight I'm going to do a ranking of the 10 best concert live albums, at least my opinion. And they're all also albums I have. I'm not just necessarily picking them because I have them. A couple of them I tried to get because I thought they belonged on this list, actually. So I've got vinyl copies of all these. But what are the greatest concert live albums? A couple things. I'm mostly focusing on the classic rock period up through the early 80s or so. I know that makes me a dinosaur, but I do think that was kind of the great age of stadium rock. And all the bands back then used to have a live album, and they played a lot of those live albums on the radio. So I tried to focus on what we might call classic rock, which I consider, uh, you know, mid '60s up through the late '70s, early '80s. That's the period I will focus on. Another thing is they've got another criterion is they've got to have great music. Um, So there's some pretty historic albums that are kind of fun to listen to that I don't necessarily have great music. For example, Clapton's Rainbow Concert's a great album. I like listening to it. I wouldn't say it's the best live album he's ever done, and but it's a good, solid. I mean, I like the album. I reviewed it earlier, or really bad but very famous albums like John Lennon and Eric Clapton Live Peace in Toronto with Yoko Ono. Perhaps the worst album I own. I also reviewed that one. So it needs to have excellent music, but that's not enough. It also needs to have sort of entered the culture in a major way, which I guess maybe means it sold a lot of copies and played a lot on the radio. I don't know if you want to debase the criterion that way, but maybe that's sort of what it means. But songs that kind of entered into the culture. I have some of the best live albums I have are pretty obscure, and they were obscure when they came out. I've got a Johnny Winter live and live album that's really a great album. And Robin Trower Live's another really good one. It's not all that obscure, but I wouldn't say it became a household word. So let's look at my 10 albums without further ado. Number 10, Kiss Alive. I thought about ranking this higher, except I got some of my personal biases will maybe come out a little bit. I remember loving this album. That's a picture of Cobo Hall, and I wasn't there, but I could have been. I was right at that age and right not that far away from Cobo Hall back then. So I just remember when that came out, all of us 14, 15-year-olds were just couldn't stop looking at that great photo on the back of Cobo Hall back when. Look at all the smoke in the air. That's a rock and roll concert, ladies and gentlemen, in case you were wondering. So it's a good album. It's Kiss was a good band. I guess I kind of have a little bit of bias because of the way they kind of commercialized after the Detroit Rock City period. Some of the later '70s stuff, I kind of lost. But I always liked their first 3 or 4 albums and up through Destroyer and then this one. And it's obviously fits the criteria. It's great music, it's great rock and roll, and it's definitely, impacted the culture. Kiss Alive is one of the probably, standard live albums. It's really set a standard. Number 9, Bob Seger, Live Bullet. Bob Seger and the Silverbolt Band. Another Detroit album. And I think if you're from Detroit, you probably agree with me. If you're not from Detroit, you might not have heard of this as much. I know you've heard of Bob Seger, but this is just an excellent live album, and it propelled Bob Seger to stardom. The force of this, and it really caught a live show by Bob Seger at the height of his powers and at the height of his popularity in the city of Detroit. And the spirit on this live album was what I think helped to take him from the Detroit market, where he was huge, to a national market. Really within a year or two after this album came out. So, and if you haven't heard this, it's got Kathmandu. It's got that super duper good version of Beautiful Loser, Traveling Man. Nutbush City Limits by Ike and Tina Turner. It's got some great guitar work by Drew Abbott. Good old barroom rock and roll, barroom. So highly recommend. Number 8, Led Zeppelin. The song remains the same. I think I've got fancier live albums. This is really, when you think about it, it's just a 3-piece. And I remember back then people would say that their studio albums were always a lot better, and they weren't, they didn't have their studio albums were really, they could be sloppy sometimes, but really they were just great. And this was kind of them up there. But they were a great live band, but they were a different band live than they were in the studio. But this caught I think over time, I remember this album was kind of obscure. If you were into Led Zeppelin, I'm old enough to remember all these records. So back when this was out, it was kind of an extra album for the true fans, and I don't think it wasn't played that much. And it wasn't listened to that much. And the movie was kind of one of those midnight movies. It was sort of popular. But I think the fact that it was part of a film, and it's really one of the most well-documented examples of Led Zeppelin live, both on album and in video. And it's over the years, it's become traction. It's one of whenever you see clips of Zeppelin, it's almost, not always, but it's often from this album and the movie that accompanied it. So, and it's great. It's got the Stairway to Heaven. Does anybody remember Laughter? There are a couple in the movie that aren't on here. I think Black Dog's in the movie. It's not on the record. I don't want to open it right now, but it's a great album. But it's raw. It's Led Zeppelin in a different mode than they were when they recorded, like Stairway to Heaven, which was so carefully done and everything. But it's a great album. Number 6, this is one that I think it was a really popular live album, so it meets the criteria. But it also is some super duper good music. If you haven't heard it, Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs, and Englishmen. It had Leon Russell on it, and a couple of the people that ended up playing with Eric Clapton, like Carl Rattles on here, and I think Jim Gordon, if I'm not mistaken, the drummer. But Chris Stanton on piano, he ended up playing with Eric Clapton. Jim Gordon's on here, yes. So, good album. By the way, this might be signed. Maybe not. But it's got like Feeling All Right, Woman of the Delta Lady, Crimea River. Those are such good songs. It's got that super duper version of Superstar. And if you like the Carpenters, who doesn't like the Carpenters, but you always hear Karen Carpenter sing it. And it's kind of cool to hear it done hard rock style. It's still got that haunting minor key, but it is a rockier version of it, done by a hard rock band. Great live album, and definitely one of the great live albums of all classic rock. Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs, and Englishmen. Great rock and roll piano on there too. You knew this was coming. Leonard Skinner, One for the Road, One More for the Road, One More from the Road. And of course, this deserves to be on there because it gave us Freebird, the version of Freebird you always hear, and what song is it you want to hear. That's become almost a joke, but again, I'm old enough to remember when that was just an iconic song, and it is a great song. And there's just like Working for MCA. It's got, it's live music, but the guitar playing, you got 3 guitar players, and it really shows what a good band they really were, a good Southern boogie band. And you hear it live, it's kind of a, and it's good live playing. I mean, it stands up to the studio albums, but they were good. And it's got all the good solos. It's tight. Really good band, really good band, and that's a great live album. And it's another one of those albums that made the band more popular and has entered the culture, obviously through Freebird, but it was just a really good overall record of the band. What year was it? 75, 76? Because their plane crash was 77, right? 76, a year before the big plane crash. So it caught the band just at the height of everything, This one probably should be higher. Frampton Comes Alive. Obviously, what are you going to say about this? I think it's still to this day one of the best-selling albums of all time. That Fleetwood Mac Rumors. It's right up there with the Beatles in terms of sales. And what I remember about this, it was kind of right between the time Frampton. I remember liking Frampton when not that many people had heard of him, like Frampton's Camel, and he had like Money and Apple of Your Eye and Show Me. A lot of those songs like Show Me the Way were on his earlier albums. I Don't Need No Doc. Well, that was Humble Pie, but Do You Feel Like We Do? And then it was another example where the studio albums were good, but he put them together and they really came to sort of a maturity. It went live, and that's kind of like several of these albums, but the Bob Seger ones like that too. They were so good live, and sometimes it took a live album to really push, how great they were out into the public. And one thing I will say is Peter Frampton, I think one of his biggest curses was he was such a pretty boy. And it wasn't too long after this album came out that he became a pop star. He did I'm in You, which was kind of almost a teeny bopper, David Cassidy, Donny Osmond type album. And he was in that movie Sgt. Pepper's. And that was right after this. And it kind of capitalized on his huge popularity. But I think in some ways he lost that rock and roll edge, at least with a lot of the fan base. And it's almost hard to forget that he was classic rock. Those early Frampton albums are really good, and he's still really good. I think he's one of those guys that kind of as the years went by, he is what he is, and he still does concerts, and they're great. I saw some video footage of him playing not that long ago, and he was doing like "Do You Feel Like We Do" with Old Pine Knob. I think it wasn't that new, but it was. But this is a great live album, obviously. And it's a super good by that Bob Mayo, who played keyboard and guitar. It's just super good musician. Some of it was kind of jazzy. I mean, and that little song he did, "Penny for Your Thoughts," the acoustic guitar. That guy was a good musician. Like I said, I think he's one of those guys that he was such a pretty boy that he didn't get taken that seriously. Maybe I don't know what that must be like, but. I don't know if, I guess that some people would think that's a blessing, but I do, in a weird way, I think that, he had that kind of teeny bopper, his hair was perfect, and he was such a good looking guy. And he became, look at that picture of him there. Great live album, great musicianship. I mean, you watch him talk about guitars. The man knows guitar. He's a true guitarist, He's right up there with all the great guitarists of rock music. All right. Live at Fillmore East, the Allman Brothers Band. I don't forget what we're on. I think this is number 3, number 4 maybe. This is obviously a great album. Some people might have ranked this higher. I put it at number 4. Again, it caught the band on a great night. The one reason I think it's not, I think the Allman Brothers became a better band after this when Dickie Betts' influence started to add more melodic elements. And this is still that kind of, a lot of the songs on here are the sort of key of A blues and shuffles and things. And I think when Dickie Betts sort of stepped up to the plate, he added that kind of breezy, sunny element that also became part of the Allman Brothers sound. And that, but still keeping the old, heavy blues that they played in the early days. And the Allman Brothers that developed out of that the live band that was almost like the Grateful Dead. They were just, every summer they were playing. And so this to me is kind of an early record of the band, still kind of in early development, but it's obviously a great album, and it's got some of the great live soloing on it. The 22-minute version of Whipping Post is epic. It's got the Statesboro Blues, the Stormy Monday. I mean, with the versions you always hear, and they're live. You can tell it's live. One thing, Eat a Peach. Maybe it's because Dwayne died, but they've got that Mountain Jam, and One Way Out, which is live, is on Eat a Peach. So they did some other live stuff that I think it musically is as good as this. But this is musically really good. Number 3, Deep Purple, Made in Japan. This is a great album. This is hard rock, Like they're sort of subdivisions of rock. There's rock and roll, there's heavy metal, there's rock, there's country rock, southern rock, psychedelic rock, acid rock. This to me is a specimen, Exhibit A of hard rock. And of course, it's got Deep Purple, obviously Smoke on the Water, a super duper good version of Space Trucking, Strange Kind of Woman, Lazy. Guitar part on Lazy is awesome. And one of my favorite songs ever, Highway Star. Now, I just wanted to warn you, if you do listen to this album, do not listen to it while you drive, particularly Highway Star. It's a very dangerous song to drive, even if you're meek and mild and you're driving a Pinto or a Toyota, it'll turn you into a hot rodder. What a great song! You hear it all the time, but once upon a time it was kind of an album track, but it's become one of their signature tunes. But it's a great song, and the versions of here are great. Ian Gillan's in super good voice. I believe this is known as the Mark II lineup, right? Which is the one everybody likes the most. Coming in at number 2, this is an album I bought like the week it came out. I wish it were in a little better shape. I don't think it's still got the book that came with it. I don't think. There used to be a book of pictures in it. What do you know? Look at this. I don't even open those. It's a good thing we don't have any negative, illegal things falling out of the album cover. Look, it's kind of it's got coffee on it, but there it is. I've still got the book that goes with it. The Last Waltz. Great album. It's got all the stars there. Super duper good album. And I think it's a little bit like the Zeppelin. I think the fact that it was part of a movie made it more enduring, Like this was kind of another one I don't think was all that famous when it was out. Like I said, I'm old enough to remember all these records. Mad Dogs and Englishmen, I was kind of young, but I remember that, like 70. I mean, I was maybe a year or two old when I first heard about it. So, but this was another one, kind of midnight movie. People that were really into it. Music was still kind of countercultural at that time, but over the years, it's become so famous. It's an example of how over time something really good can become more famous than it really was when it happened. I mean, it was people that liked the band and Dylan and Clapton and all those guys knew about it and loved it. But it's a super duper good album. It was their farewell show at in San Francisco on Thanksgiving. You know what? I should do a review of this album on Thanksgiving Day, because it was Thanksgiving Day night, 1976, one of the greatest concerts ever. You got Clapton farther on up the road. Over the years, what really has kind of grown to me is the set they do with Dylan. You know, Bob Dylan and the band. Dylan was always, you never knew what Dylan would do, but when you stuck him up there with the band, they caught him with that kind of, that rough Dylan, but also with good musicians, and it gave him that kind of a ramshackle period feel that is my favorite part of that kind of electric but kind of ramshackle rock, folky rock Dylan. And they Baby Let Me Follow You Down, Forever Young. You know, it's just super duper good album. Musically and what it represents in music history. Number one, I did have a couple honorable mentions that I just happen to have that I think are worthy of honorable mention. One is REO Speedwagon, You Get What You Play For. That's a great album, and that REO Speedwagon, that was when they were a rock band. You know, I mean, I'm sure they're still good now, but they had Gary Richrath, and they were a rock band that came out of the bars in Illinois, and this kind of was them at the height of that hard rock REO, which I think some people almost forget. You know, Keep On Loving You and some of those songs kind of took them a little bit into Candy territory. Not, they made their money, but I know this has good old guitar slinging Gary Richrath, and it's got like You Do, I've Been Told, Being Kind Can Hurt Someone Sometimes, Music Man, Son of a Poor Man. Golden Country is such a great song. And of course, Riding the Storm Out, 157 Riverside Avenue, but Riding the Storm Out was epic on that, and in my opinion, better. They did another couple good albums, but it wasn't too long after this that, in my opinion, they kind of became more commercial, which maybe was a good move. You can't blame people for making a little money and staying viable, but I never liked it as much. But that period was great. I saw them 2-3 times back then. I put this one down. I have a copy of it, An Evening with John Denver. You might not remember this, but that was a very popular album. And it's a little different, it's not a rock album, but it shows you John Denver was underrated, It's got some really nice live versions like Farewell Andromeda, Welcome to My Morning. This is another one I grew up listening to, Around the World with Three Dog Night. What an awesome album, what an awesome band. It's, and they were hard rock, but they had the organ, the lineup back then, like organ, electric guitar, but they do Out in the Country, Pieces of April, One Man Band, Never Been to Spain, and Joy to the World, all that stuff. And then last but not least for the honorable mentions, Robin Trower live. That's a great live album. Just three guys, but it's got two Rolling Stone, Althea. I think it was before. Yeah, it didn't have Day of the Eagle, a little bit of Sympathy, but it didn't have Day of the Eagle, Caledonia, and some of the ones that came out a little later, I think, that were a little more famous. But it's got some great, awesome guitar playing on it. Number one, Woodstock. Gotta be. I mean, really, first of all, musically, it was a great concert. I mean, Woodstock holds its own musically, but beyond that, what a great moment in American history, really. I'm trying to think of anything else that's on a par with that in terms of American music, and I can't. I don't know. In the 19th century, I learned Stephen Foster, some great musicians, and You had big band and, but in terms of a concert that drew that much attention and people and that represents that much culturally, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, but that was TV. So I guess we could, but I mean, Woodstock's on a huge scale. Great, great show. And it had a movie. And again, it's another one of those things. There were a lot of great festivals back then, in that summer, there were a lot of regional festivals that were like Woodstock, and it's just as many people almost in a lot of cases. But this was the one that ended up being a movie, and it sort of came to represent something larger than it was, And besides that, it was some great music. It was a great party. It was great music. A lot of rain. I actually know some people that were there, and they said they remember being cold and wet and wanting to go home. Particularly, I think it was Saturday when it rained. But in retrospect, what a moment. And so Woodstock #1, gotta be. There are albums in that pile I've listened to more. I've got live albums that I've listened to more that I didn't mention. Bebop Deluxe Live is a good live album, but I didn't really feel like they met the criteria of, sort of widespread influence in music. And Woodstock's a great live album. #1, gotta be. God bless you. Take care.